forward with legislation that defends American interests. H.R. 276, the Gulf of America Act, renames the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America and directs federal agencies to update their documents and maps accordingly to incorporate the new name. This legislation codifies President Trump's actions to rename the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America. In short, this legislation recognizes the strategic influence America has over this geography, not to mention the existing economic, cultural, and commercial might that we passively exert on the Gulf. Gulfs across the world are recognized by their geographic linkages. This is true of the Gulf of Oman, the Arabian Gulf, or even the Gulf of Alaska. The nomenclature of this Gulf goes back to the mid-1600s, before the United States was even a thought, and when Spanish influence over Central America and the Caribbean was at its zenith. Now the United States' interest in the Gulf of America outpaces Mexico's. The entirety of Mexico's economic activity related to the Gulf pales in comparison to even some of our counties' economic activity. The necessary renaming made by the president did not end the world, as some would like us to believe, nor did it cause a single bit of harm to the American people. I'd be curious to know from our Democrat colleagues if they have found a single concrete data point that this decision was detrimental to the American people. They can't, because there's not a single data point that exists regarding that. Having the realities of the Gulf's link to America reflected in government records makes sense. We shouldn't let certain allergic reactions to decisions made by the Trump administration stand in the way of good public policy. Instead, we should support this decision and codify it, demonstrating our Article 1 authority. H.R. 881, the DHS Restrictions on Confucius Institutes and Chinese Entities of Concern Act, establishes funding restrictions via the Department of Homeland Security and on institutions of higher education that have an established relationship with Confucius Institutes. For years, the CCP has executed sophisticated and targeted propaganda and espionage campaigns across the globe. The CCP exploits the open and collaborative nature of American academia to conduct widespread industrial and military espionage inside the United States. Although there are fewer than 5 active Confucius Institutes left in existence in the United States, the GAO found that 43 out of 74 schools surveyed still maintain a relationship with an entity that supported their previous Confucius Institute. This must be addressed immediately. The federal nexus of H.R. 881 is taxpayer funding. Taxpayer dollars are privileged and provided through Congress's Article 1 powers. Congress can and should safeguard this funding and ensure that the dollars are appropriately used while encouraging universities to end relationships with partners who do not have America's best interest in mind. Today, we will advance these 2 bills that put American interests first. That's where they should always be placed. I'll happily extend the invitation for our Democrat colleagues to join us in supporting both. While I look forward to today's discussion, I now yield to Ms. Scanlon for any comment she wishes to make.
Thank you, Chairwoman Fox. So today we debate 2 bills, another tired Confucius Institute bill and a bill to rename the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. I thought the bills to make the world safe for household appliances were as low as this House majority could go, but I underestimated their creativity. The issue of Confucius Institutes in America seems to be a largely settled issue. Congress has taken multiple steps over the years to limit the presence of these institutions on American campuses, and by most accounts, those efforts have worked. But if my colleagues want to beat a dead horse to get in some talking points because there's no legislation of consequence on the floor this week, enjoy yourselves. Which naturally brings us to H.R. 276. Ever since the beginning of Trump's term, House Republicans have been tripping over themselves to find new and more embarrassing ways to suck up to the president and indulge his peculiar obsessions. They've introduced bills to name highways, airports, and even schools after the president. They've pushed to make his birthday a federal holiday. They've proposed putting his face on the $100 bill and carving him into Mount Rushmore. And every time he posts on Truth Social, no matter how bizarre or petty the post, Republicans eagerly line up to be the one to make it happen. I'm sure by the end of the week, someone will have introduced legislation to turn Alcatraz back into a federal prison, even though it's been a museum for decades. I'm not going to mince words in case you thought I was. This bill to rename the Gulf of Mexico is a stupid, unserious waste of time and taxpayer dollars. It's an embarrassment to the nation that it was ever introduced, let alone that it's being brought to the floor for a vote. We don't want a country where decisions are made by tweet or cable news interviews, and we definitely don't want Congress to waste its time on nonsense like this. Americans want us to work on real issues, not wasting time and money on bills that have no value, other than creating a fresh opportunity for the Trump family empire to make money on merch. $40 to $50 per hat for those on display at the cabinet meeting last week. Congress needs to work on real issues, not just enriching the Trump family fortunes. We need to lower the cost of living. We need to help families and children and working people navigate the real problems they face in daily life. Americans are struggling with the soaring cost of groceries, rent, health insurance, prescription drugs, strollers, lumber, drywall, and the economy is in a tailspin thanks to this administration's reckless tariffs. These are the issues we should be working on. It says a lot about our Republican colleagues and their priorities that instead of working on the issues they campaigned on, they'd rather waste our time with embarrassing bills like these. We are a nation of laws, not men. Our country was founded in direct opposition to kings, not service to them. It's a disgrace to our history and our country's legacy for Congress to spend another second of legislative time groveling in this way. I urge my colleagues to find the courage to dispense with this bill and bills like it before we do more damage to this institution. As was mentioned, the Gulf of Mexico was so named over 500 years ago. If we want to update that name to reflect our current American culture, maybe we should rename it the Sea of Emoluments, a place where one can board the ship of fools and navigate from a state of ignorance to the Confederacy of dunces, because that appears to be where this legislation is heading us. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Scanlon. Without objection, any prepared statements that our witnesses may have will be included in the record. I now welcome our first panel, Representative Hageman and Representative Hoyle from the Committee on Natural Resources. Your full statement will be submitted for the record, and we ask you summarize your statement in 5 minutes. Representative Hageman, I welcome your testimony.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. First, I want to thank my colleague, Representative Green, for working with the Natural Resource Committee team to advance this legislation. The Committee on Natural Resources remains committed to advancing President Trump's agenda to put America first, and passage of this bill is an important symbol of that effort and a step in the right direction. H.R. 276 will codify President Trump's historic action to rename the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America. H.R. 276 seeks to put into law a portion of President Trump's Executive Order 14172, quote, restoring names that honor American greatness, end quote. By enacting this legislation, we ensure consistency in references to laws, maps, regulations, and records of the United States. Throughout our country's history, presidents have changed the names of America's lands and waters. The change we are discussing today signals to the world that America is standing tall and that we are proud of our country. We are proud of our accomplishments, our history, and our future. It is nearly impossible to overstate the Gulf of America's critical role in achieving not only American energy independence, but dominance. President Trump has made it a priority of his administration to reassert America's role as a global leader in energy production, and the Gulf of America is a critical part of that agenda. The American people support these policies, and we must deliver on the promises that we have made. I am proud to support President Trump in this bill, and I urge the committee to report an appropriate rule to allow for its consideration in the House. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. Representative Hoyle, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair Fox and members of the committee. I'd like to wish everybody a happy Cinco de Mayo. We could be celebrating the victory of the Mexican army over the French, but we're here renaming a body of water. And let's be clear, this is a waste of taxpayer dollars. When we changed the name of Fort Bragg numbers of times and back to Fort Bragg, it cost $6 million, but who is going to pay for the maps, for the books, for the signs that municipalities, schools, and libraries have to replace? Who pays for that? We do as taxpayers. So this is a waste of taxpayer dollars. And this is not what the American people want. My phone isn't ringing off the hook with people saying, please rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. Over 70% of Americans oppose this bill and spending time on this. My phone's ringing off the hook with seniors who can't get through to Social Security, are on the phone waiting 4, 6, 8 hours and then getting disconnected, with veterans who can't access services, with private citizens and elected officials whose grants have been frozen, grants that we, with Congress, with the power of the purse, said should be spent. And projects are dying. And we are getting lots of calls from manufacturers and farmers and small business people who are being devastated by onerous and erratic tariffs. That's what people are talking about when they're calling our office. The founders of this country set up our democratic republic with 3 separate and equal branches of government, specifically so that the United States would never have a king, never be ruled by one person. We took an oath to obey the Constitution, not to bend the knee to the president, no matter what party they're in. And yet, here we are, again, wasting taxpayer dollars. This was proposed in 2010 by Stephen Colbert, a comedian, when he was making fun of actions like this. And now here we are. It has become a reality. Went from a comedy show, and now we are in Congress with everything else going on focused on this. I'm going to read a quote from a Guardian editorial, because I think it says everything. Why stop here? How about declaring by fiat that the Washington Monument is now to be called the Trump Monument? Why not chisel another presidential face onto Mount Rushmore and call it Mount Donald? The great renaming has begun, and George Orwell would understand exactly what's going on. I urge my colleagues to reject this bill and get back to work on things that benefit our constituents and the taxpayers of America. Thank you very much, and with that, I yield my time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fischbach. I'm sorry. Mr. Griffith, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I greatly appreciate it. I think it's interesting that Orwell was brought up, was doublespeak. What's interesting about that is the actual history of the body of water, previously known as the Gulf of Mexico, because my colleague on the other side said, it was been settled for 500 years. That's just not accurate. The great Spanish, from the Spanish Netherlands at the time, the great cartographer Ortelius labeled it on his maps, and I have one of those maps, is disputed map, but I collect antique maps, and one of his maps, or on his maps, he referred to it as the Sea of the North. It's been called the Sea of the North. Cortez liked that name. Others have called it the Gulf of Cortez. Others have called it the Gulf of Yucatan. There have been a lot of different names. Now, here's what's interesting when we take a look at this. And one can question the timing, and one can argue, is this the right time? I would argue it should have been probably 1803, when Louisiana, which was once part of the Spanish provinces in the New World, was sold by the Spanish to the French, and then to the French. And the French had had it before and then traded with the Spanish. But the Spanish at one time, in their territories of New Spain or Mexico, had what are now the states of Florida, claims to Alabama, Mississippi, clear title to Louisiana, and of course, Texas. And as time went on, the United States in 1802 made a treaty with the Spanish to get Florida. So one could argue in 1802 it probably should have been changed to the Gulf of America. One could argue 1803 when the French got it back, or when they sold the Louisiana territory to the United States, it should have become the Gulf of America. One could certainly argue that when Texas seceded from Mexico, at that point more of the shoreline belonged to territories other than the country of Mexico, that it should have been changed. And one certainly should argue that James K. Polk missed this one, because when he came along and they had the Mexican-American War and brought in those territories, and you had Texas then joining the Union a little bit later, certainly by that point in time it should have been the Gulf of America. I'm trying to figure out why we waited so long. And when it was first proposed, I'd never thought of it. When it was first proposed, I thought, this is something that should have happened in the 19th century, when the greater portion of the waters or the shores of what is today called the Gulf of Mexico touched parts of the United States of America. But further, and this oftentimes drives the Canadians and some folks in Mexico crazy, we're all part of North America. This is the great North. This is the great North American continent, and we're naming it Gulf of America. That seems to be a much better name. Now, I posited, Madam Chair, that perhaps, and I don't know the answer to this, that perhaps they didn't do that because until the name was changed, there was somewhere in the Arctic, in what is now Russian territory, a small gulf that was known by some cartographers as the Gulf of America, and maybe they thought they'd create confusion. I don't know if that's accurate or not, Madam Chair. I just submit that when you look at the history of the body of water, the name should have been changed in the 19th century, and we're way behind times. And unless my colleague would like to respond and tell me I got something wrong in there, I think I got that pretty good.
I think you've given us an excellent history lesson today. Thank you.
Well, if anybody ever wants to see some of my old maps, they're in my office.
Thank you, Mr. Griffiths, for always giving us a great history lesson. Ms. Scanlon, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Hoyle, is there a CBO score on this bill? There is? Do we know about what the score is? Anyone?
I can get you that information.
Okay. I think I heard it was about $500,000 to change some federal maps, but of course that doesn't impact the schools that have to pay for maps and books and changing all that.
What we know is when we changed the name of Fort Bragg, it cost $6 million, but there is an added cost. And again, this is an unfunded mandate to our local schools, to our local libraries. Who is paying for all of these things to be reprinted? This is a burden on my constituents, on your constituents, on taxpayers, on localities, all because right now somebody decided this is the most important thing that we can be doing at this point in time. And so there is a cost, and it will be borne by our constituents.
Cost of actually changing the
I
names.
have additional information in response to your
Great.
question.
Thank you.
Based on the cost of similar activities, CBO estimates that updating federal documents and maps would cost less than $500,000 over the next 5-year period. Any related spending would be subject to the availability of appropriated funds. Goes on to say that HR 276 also could affect direct spending by some agencies that are allowed to use fees, receipts from the sale of goods, and other collections to cover operating costs. So,
Okay, so that's the impact on the federal government, but not on
and I also think
all
that
of our schools.
we have consistently questioned CBO scoring in this
I know.
particular committee for many reasons.
Thank
So
you.
I think that there's probably questions about the validity of that as
Okay,
well.
but obviously no assessment of what would happen in the costs to our local school districts or the costs to U.S. prestige across the country for an absolutely ridiculous act of indulgence of some sort. I do want to thank Representative Hoyle for pointing out that it was Stephen Colbert who first proposed this in 2010, proposed it because at the time the country was dealing with the aftermath of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, and the justification for renaming the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America was because the U.S. had so fouled it, it should take responsibility. And given the attacks we're seeing on the EPA right now, maybe there's some merit to that now. Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Now recognize Mr. Langworthy for his time of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's very sad to see my colleagues on the other side of the aisle get so upset about a simple name change to a major artery of American commerce and economic investment, a change that has already been reflected in the Geographic Names Information System, in the Geographic Names Server. If only they had been quite this animated over the millions of illegal immigrants that crossed our borders in the last 4 years. Maybe they should have taken some of that misplaced worry about taxpayer dollars, about reprinting a few maps, into what actually happened with the most historic violation of our sovereignty that the world has ever seen over the last 4 years. That happened. They didn't worry about the cost to the American taxpayer then. I have nothing further to add other than to say that I support this legislation and am a proud, I think, day one co-sponsor. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize Ms. Ledger Fernandez for her time of questioning.
Thank you, and well, thank you. So, for months, my phones have been ringing off the hook, and I know everybody's phones have been ringing off the hook because Americans have been calling us because they are freaked out. In fact, Americans have been calling us so much that they have shut down the phone system at times, because they're so upset about what Trump is doing, what Doge is doing, what Musk is doing. And, I've not fielded a single call asking for this name change, but Americans really disapprove of what Donald Trump and the Republican leaders are doing to their pocketbooks, their Social Security, their health care. They don't like the fact that Trump is ignoring the Constitution and doesn't believe in the basic value of due process. Hell, on the interview on NBC, he didn't even seem to know that due process was guaranteed under the Constitution and had to be honored. And the reality is Americans thought that Trump, and they voted for him, and they feel betrayed because they thought he was going to address costs on day one. But what have we seen instead of Trump addressing costs on day one? We've already had the first quarter of negative growth. That's the beginning of a recession. And everybody says a recession is coming because of Trump's policies, because of Trump's tariffs. Madam President, I ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record the Fox News poll. There's lots of other news polls out there, but just so that people know, this is coming from the Republicans. The Fox News poll that shows 56% of Americans disapprove of Trump's handling of the economy, 58% disapprove of his tariffs, and 59% disapprove of how he's handling or not inflation. And it's this idea that he's not handling what's important that has Americans upset. Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, I said Madam Chairwoman.
Gentlelady is asked to have the Fox polling put into the record without objection. So ordered.
So according to a poll published by the Washington Post newspaper and ABC News, only 39% of Americans approve of how Trump is handling his presidency. and they think he is going too far. Because he keeps doing things like this, and like the tariffs, which are serious. I mean, I'm sorry if I reacted to the idea that part of this may have come out of a comedian, but the tariffs are hurting people. And most Republicans, not all, I recognize that Representative Hageman has had a town hall. Most Republicans don't even want to hold town halls because their voters are so mad at them. I did a town hall in one of Ken Calvert's towns on Saturday. They were so disappointed that he hadn't showed up to answer their questions about Medicaid, about Social Security. But you know who was particularly upset in that audience? The veterans. We had multiple veterans get up and say, he's not showing up to answer our questions. And you know what else is upsetting? The idea that he could just say we are going to rename Veterans Day Victory Day. We're going to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. We're going to rename things. The fact that he is acting like a tyrant and saying we're going to do things that I want because I want them to, and that Republicans are then going to go along. So these are just a bunch of ego trips. His birthday parade, $45 million that he says it's going to cost, but we should all be happy. Another idea about this is about ego, not about caring for your community. And you know what? The Gulf of Mexico doesn't need a new name. It's been that name for a long time. Yes, it may have other ideas, but over from 1552, and let me tell you, I'm from New Mexico. I am from New Mexico. New Mexico doesn't need a new name either. New Mexico, our name reflects that there is a complex history, and that when you understand the complexity of history, the diversity of history, you are better off for it. So let's leave the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of Mexico. But if you want to rename it, since you are not doing what everybody wants us to do, how about naming it the Gulf of Plunder? Because you're here from natural resources, but we know that tomorrow, we're going to take a bill tomorrow, aren't we? And it's going to be about plundering the Gulf of Mexico. It's going to be about giving oil and gas companies more power, more money, and more control over our lives without any consequences. It's going to let them lower the royalty rates, take more money of our resources that belong to the American people. Let them have them for cheap, on the cheap. Let them not have to be accountable for the pollution they leave. That is called plundering America's resources. And we should be protecting those resources in the Gulf of Mexico. And with that, I don't know if Representative Hoyle, you want to add anything to anything you've heard today? I am the last Democrat, so this is your last chance if you want to just add anything.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Ms. Leisure-Fernandez. I think that you said it exactly right. Again, I have done 12 town halls and throughout my district in the most conservative and in the most progressive, and there's standing room only, and people are concerned about NOAA, about tariffs, about veterans care, about FEMA, about wildfire response, about all the things they want government to work. And yes, we should work on waste, fraud, and abuse, absolutely. And that's not what this is. And this is going to, the costs are going to be borne by our local schools. And you may say it's just a little bit, but every little bit counts, especially in our rural communities. So I think you and Ms. Scanlon said it well, and I really wish we could be focusing on things that we could do together. And there's a lot that can be done. And this seems like a waste of time and taxpayer dollars.
Thank you very much, and it is absolutely true. The voters want us to be taking up those tariffs, and I keep saying it. If they believe the tariffs are great, take them up, debate them, but that's our job. That's what we should be doing, not renaming the Gulf of Mexico. So thank you very much, and with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Now recognize Ms. Fishbach for her time of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just have a question. You're so concerned about the money that, were you concerned when Biden's Department of Education put about $3.9 billion worth of rules and paperwork that cost our school districts that much money? Were you concerned about that?
Thank you. Through the chair, Ms. Fishback. Yes, I spoke up
Okay.
when Democratic presidents did things that cost my constituents taxpayer dollars. I wasn't afraid to stand up and disagree with a president who was of my party, nor should you. Because there are three separate and equal branches of government, and we need
Okay.
to do our job. And this is a separate issue.
I'm reclaiming my time because I had a simple question. But $3.9 billion worth of rules and regulations and paperwork that was put on our schools under the Biden administration seems incredibly significant. And I also was wondering, I know that you found the information regarding what CBO said about less than $500,000, and I was just wondering if they could go back and find how much it cost when President Obama changed the name of Mount McKinley, because this is not a new phenomenon. I mean, there's lots of drama coming from the other side regarding a simple change in a name, and I think we should be proud to call the Gulf of America the Gulf of America, because it is that brings back pride in the U.S. And it just seems like there's a lot more drama coming from the other side than is necessary on this. And, you know, if a school district can't afford to purchase an entirely new map, you know what a sticker would do? You know, just put that over the top and put Gulf of America. I mean, there are a lot of simple ways to deal with this. But Ms. Hageman, I know that you had things you wanted to add.
Well, I would also say that the schools purchase textbooks almost on a yearly basis. That's why it is such a lucrative business. So I don't think that there's nearly the expense associated with this. They're constantly updating textbooks. That's what they do. I also wanted to make sure that we corrected a statement by Ms. Scanlon. She referred to America fouling the Gulf, and that's why Mr. Colbert was joking that it should be named the Gulf of America. It was not America that fouled the Gulf. In fact, the Horizon Deepwater well blowout was done during the Obama administration, and I believe it was British Petroleum that held that particular permit. So I just wanted to make sure that we clarified that it was not America that did that at all. I would agree with you. I think that there's a lot more drama associated with this. I'm excited about the fact that under this administration we have pride in our country. We have pride in our past and our future. It is very clear that in terms of the geographic location that we are discussing, there is much more influence from America, much more of an economic impact and a driver from America than there is Mexico. This makes sense to me. I think everyone's made very good points in that regard. With that, thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that, I yield back.
Gentle yields back. Now recognize Mr. Scott for his time of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have a whole lot of questions, but I would just like to say that I'm glad that we can fish in the Gulf of America again, because I would just remind you that the Obama administration had shut the sniper season down to 3 days out of the whole year. That's where the crazy people that ran National Marine Fishery Services were taking us, to where the American citizens couldn't fish in the Gulf anymore. Now, I went fishing out there on February 28th with my son and a bunch of his friends, and you know where we went? Straight to the oil rigs, because you know what? There's a whole lot of fish on those oil rigs. It's just been great for the habitat and for fishing in the Gulf of America to have all those oil rigs out there. And I guarantee you this, if you want to catch fish, that's a good place to go. And so we do energy cleaner and better than anybody else, and I hope we are issuing more permits out there. The other thing I would tell you is, unfortunately, some of the legacy National Marine Fishery Services rules from the wacky left that's apparently distraught by anything and everything that we do that give the American citizens the right to hunt and fish and enjoy the oceans that we have. You know, we still can't fish much in the South Atlantic. Did you know that, Ms. Hageman? They had, this is how stupid, I shouldn't use that term probably, but hopefully my kids aren't watching, National Marine Fishery Services recommendations were. They were just going to shut down bottom fishing in the South Atlantic for recreational fishing. And where do these ideas come from? Where do these ideas come from? It's the people that wake up in the morning and just wacky crazy, and somehow they end up in these federal agencies telling the rest of us what we can and can't do. And that's why President Trump, one of the reasons he's here today. People are sick and tired of that madness. So Representative Hageman, if you've got anything to say, I'll turn it over to you. Other than that, I'll yield my time back.
As chairman of the Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries Subcommittee for Natural Resources, I can assure you that we are working on the very issue that you have identified and for the very reasons that you've explained. The fisheries should not be shut down. It is an abundant part of and a very important part of our heritage and our culture and our economy, which brings up one other point, and this is something that has been in the news more recently. You've indicated that we have created such phenomenal fisheries, and we've done that for a variety of reasons. But I think another reason why we should change this to the Gulf of America versus the Gulf of Mexico is for over 40 years, the country of Mexico has been dumping raw sewage into the area near San Diego, California. And the head of the EPA, Lee Zeldin, was just there approximately 2 weeks ago. I was just in San Diego meeting with some folks down there, and they described the situation. It's absolutely a horrific, horrific situation. It is an environmental catastrophe and disaster created, and the country of Mexico absolutely refuses to address it and fix it. And has been fouling our waters for decades upon decades. It needs to be resolved. But that is another reason why we need to retake and claim ownership of this area and make sure people do know that it is the Gulf of America. We should not be rewarding Mexico for their bad acts. And that's just one example.
That sounds like a real issue that if the Democrats would actually join the Republicans and work to resolve, we could work to resolve it. But they're opposed to anything that Donald Trump's for. So if he wants to clean up what Mexico's doing to the Gulf of America now, I mean, they'll oppose us on that. So,
well, they shouldn't. It is absolutely a horrific situation, and it needs to be addressed, and the country of Mexico needs to be held accountable for dumping raw sewage into the ocean on a regular basis.
yeah, you can't make that seem right, no matter how crazy you are on the left. With that, Mr. Chair, I yield.
Gentleman yields back. Normally, we would flip sides, but Mr. Neguse has asked if he could have just a minute. Just a minute, so I'll go to Mr. Norman next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did you have a question for Mr. Langworthy?
No, I was able to clarify the situation about British Petroleum actually being the owner of the Horizon Deepwater well rather than the country of America.
Well, I don't really have any questions. It's interesting, the matter of costs come up. Where was the effort on the cost of illegal immigration and the millions it's cost us? Where's the cost of leaving all the military equipment in Afghanistan? Where was that cost? Is that taken from children? Where's the cost of the fentanyl that came across this border? That's not taken from children, that's killing children. You know, and the left is just, is really hypocritical when it comes to this. On a name change to America, he loves the country. And I really don't have any other questions other than it's unbelievable that we're having the pushback, but it doesn't surprise me.
The only comment I would make is that illegal immigration cost our country $150 billion last year alone.
How about to deport them, to put them back? We're paying 3 times then. It costs to feed them, it costs to haul them over here in the middle of the night, it costs to take them out of here. You know, this country is in a bind because of what this administration, what the past administration has done. And to ignore somebody that was cognitively gone is unbelievable. Anyway, I yield back. Thank you for doing this. It's a good bill. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize Mr. Neguse for his time for questioning.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your courtesy, and thank you, Ms. Hageman and Ms. Hoyle, for being here and for your testimony. I appreciate you all coming before the Rules Committee. Ms. Hageman, I thought I want to perhaps spend a bit of time unpacking some of the conversation you just had with Mr. Norman. We both represent Western states, Rocky Mountain West, of course, from congressional neighbors, if you will. I represent northwestern Colorado, as you know, a long border with Wyoming. And I understand that you held a town hall pretty recently in Wyoming. I don't know if
10 of them.
What was that?
10.
10 of them.
Town halls.
So I am curious, so you've held a lot of them, way more than a lot of your colleagues on that side of the aisle, I will say, so I appreciate that. I've held 10 as well, my district, but I'm wondering, what are you hearing at those town halls? What do folks, just give us a sense of the flavor of what folks are concerned about in the state of Wyoming.
They're concerned about energy production, making sure that we get back to energy independence, which is part of the reason why I think it's so important to rename this to Gulf of America in light of the amount of production. It accounts for about 15% of our oil and gas production in the country. So that's one of the big issues that you hear wherever you go, whether you're in town halls or meetings, is the importance of protecting our energy industry. I hear a lot about ensuring that we are implementing the agenda and the policies that Donald Trump ran on.
Okay.
This being one of them. I think people are,
So wait,
again,
can
I think people
Can I just
again-
ask you a question on that? Let me just make sure, because I understood the first part. You said energy dominance, protecting the energy industry is something you hear from folks that you represent in Wyoming, and I appreciate that. And then you said implementing President Trump's policies. So you're saying that there are people at your town halls who are demanding that you rename the Gulf of Mexico?
I think it's across the entire board.
Has that
is
come up
part
at any of your
the
town halls?
Actually, it has. And
It
it's
has?
also- yes, and it's also come up in the meetings
The
that I've
people
had
of
with
Wyoming
people.
were demanding that you rename the Gulf of Mexico?
See, you use the word demand.
Oh,
Very few
asking.
people come to me and
Imploring.
demand anything.
Well, I guess
What
I would
people
love
say,
to-
what people say is that they want us to implement the agenda that Donald Trump
that
ran
includes
on, and this
renaming
is
the
one
Gulf of
them,
Mexico?
because it has to do with pride in America and what America stands
Representative,
for.
I would
So-
just simply say,
Well, you can argue with me as much
it's
as
not
you'd
about an
like
argument.
to.
I would love to attend one of the.
I would
guess
welcome you to attend
I
one of
am
my town
asking you an
halls.
honest question, and you're welcome to answer it any way you'd like. You're telling me and this committee that at one of your town halls,
I have said at my town halls
let me
and
finish my
meetings,
question.
at
You'll have
town
an
halls and
opportunity-
my meetings.
You'll have an opportunity to answer. Let me
Okay.
finish my question. You've held 10 town halls
Yes.
across Wyoming.
Yes.
And at those town halls, Wyoming residents, constituents have said to you, I would like you to rename the Gulf of Mexico. Has that happened?
Yes.
That has happened?
At the meetings that I have held, as I have said to you repeatedly now, I not only am holding town halls, I'm holding meetings with my constituents.
Sure.
The entire agenda that President Trump ran on, they've talked to me about no taxes on tips.
That's not what,
They
I'm
have
not
talked to
asking you
me-
about no
they-
taxes
they
on
have talked
tips.
to me- They have
That's
talked
not
to
the
me
bill that
about
you're here testifying
renaming
about.
the Gulf
The
of
bill-
America. They have talked to me about the oil and gas development
Well,
that we have down there.
I
They have
think
talked
it's a
about
shame.
exporting energy out of
I'll
the Gulf
reclaim
of
my time
America.
because I think it's a shame.
And I would.
So
I
you're
would-
calling me,
would
I
remind-
think what you're
I
saying
think-
is you don't believe what I'm
Hang on.
saying.
I'm
Hang
saying
on,
that
hang on.
I would love to come to a town hall, and so I'll certainly look forward to, what we may do is, we may just consider doing a town hall in Wyoming myself so that I can get a better sense from Republicans, Democrats,
You're welcome.
unaffiliated people of Wyoming as to what their priorities are. My sense is, I'm not disagreeing with you that there are many folks in Wyoming who believe that the Congress ought to be pursuing policies that President Trump supports. What I am suggesting is that I find it a little bit unbelievable that of all the issues that the American people are dealing with, that my constituents are dealing with, that your constituents are dealing with, that at these town halls, renaming the Gulf of Mexico was a top priority. I suspect that
One
the
of
people
the-
of your
one of
state,
the things
I'm
that
not
you're
done
ignoring-
talking, you'll have an opportunity to respond. I don't believe that the people in your state, nor the people in mine, would identify renaming the Gulf of Mexico as their top priority. And I find it absurd that we have to engage in this discussion to act as though this is anything but abnormal, that this is sort of just regular order, that yes, in the first 4 months of the 119th Congress, the Republican majority has decided that this is so important that we ought to take floor time to rename the Gulf of Mexico, notwithstanding all of the other policies that I suspect many of your supporters, many of the citizens that you represent are passionate about. I find that hard to believe. And apparently I'm the only one, or at least you and I disagree about this, but I suspect my colleagues maybe on this side of the aisle concur in that assessment. But in any event, I am happy to give you an opportunity to respond. And
So one of the things, Mr. Neguse, that you are ignoring is the fact that the state of Wyoming and my constituents in Wyoming have a very close connection to the Gulf of America because we are one of the largest energy producers in the nation. We are the largest coal producer. We're the eighth largest oil and gas producer. Our resources, our oil and gas and coal are actually exported out of the Gulf of America. So it is something that is at the forefront of the minds of the people in the state of Wyoming. I also want to point out one thing.
What does this bill do to help them?
I want to point out one other thing that you did, which is a very clever trick, which is that you asked me if I'd been asked any questions, and I told you that I had. And when you did your soliloquy there at the end, you accused me of being dishonest and disingenuous by then converting that to being the top priority. I didn't say that it was the top priority,
Okay.
but I did say that I was asked questions,
Okay.
and there has been discussions.
So let's have this semantics debate
not
then.
only in the meetings that I've held,
Okay.
but when I have met with people who actually have a direct connection to
Sure.
the Gulf of America. So I think what you're trying to imply is that Wyoming has no interest in the Gulf of America, when in fact the state of Wyoming, with our energy
Ms.
resources,
Hageman, have you testified in front of this? Okay, I've been generous with my time. Have you testified in front of this committee yet this year? Is this your first time testifying in front of this committee?
Probably this year, but not last year. No,
No,
I've
I'm
testified
asking you
before.
this year. I'm saying in the last 4 months, since the 119th Congress has
I think
started,
so.
this is your first time testifying,
I
right?
think so.
You're chairwoman of the Water, Fisheries, and Wildlife Subcommittee, are you not?
Yes.
And this is the first bill that you have decided to present to this committee on behalf of the state that you serve. So this notion, I'm saying to you, whether you or the Republican majority have picked this as a priority is besides the point. Clearly, this is what you all have decided to spend your time on in the opening months of the 119th Congress. Maybe that's what the people of, I guess, is what you're testifying to today, is that the people of Wyoming expect that from you and they support that. I can certainly tell you that in Colorado, of all of the issues that are important to the residents of my state, Gulf of America renaming does not crack the top 3, the top 10 of issues that my constituents care about. You clearly feel differently. That's your prerogative. I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy, for his time questioning.
Thank the chairman. Thank the gentleladies for appearing before the committee. I assume the gentlelady from Wyoming loves America. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, I do.
Is it true that this Congress has passed a number of meaningful bills, for example, the Lake and Riley Act?
Yes.
Which has now been signed into law?
Yes.
To make sure we protect Americans from the dangers of wide open borders. Is that true?
Yes, and the SAVE Act is another
Have
one.
we also passed the SAVE Act, which they've not brought up for a vote yet, but which Democrats killed last Congress? Is that correct?
Yes.
In order to get through 60 votes in the Senate. It's also true that we passed a piece of legislation to carry out what was a bipartisan ask to deal with the injunction issue. Elena Kagan has done so, the former Solicitor General under a Democrat. We passed a bill that would have dealt with the issue of a single judge issuing nationwide injunctions or temporary restraining orders. We passed it out of the House.
That's correct.
And then we'll see what happens in the Senate, but we know that there's some opposition in the Senate from our Democratic colleagues. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
And it is true that the President of the United States has been issuing executive orders to defend our country, to secure the border, and that the rate has dropped from basically about 94% year over year, March to March, in terms of apprehensions at the border?
Yes.
Is it true that we were able to do that without the supposed bipartisan bill last year that Democrats said we needed to pass in order to secure the border?
That's correct.
Are the American people that you represent, the people in Wyoming that you represent, are they happy with what is occurring with respect to a secure border, and then also the executive orders that reopen American energy, as you described for your home state, as I do for Texas?
Critical, both two of the top issues.
Right. So in terms of executing for the American people, would you say that this administration, combined with this Congress, given narrow majorities, is we are collectively carrying out the wishes of the American people who gave Republicans control of the White House, House, and Senate in November?
No question about it.
Do we have much more to do?
Yes, we do.
Would agree. And now we talk about this bill that's in front of us, the Gulf of America. It has been discussed, I think, on both sides of the aisle. Does the gentlelady agree that words matter?
Yes, they do.
Does the gentlelady agree that when you have something like the Gulf of America versus the Gulf of Mexico, that there's something about that, that it does in fact evoke imagery about what is in fact America, and that you've got waters that are central to certainly what we call the Gulf Coast from Florida all the way to Texas? Is that fair?
Yes.
And then to the extent that words matter, that recognition is something that would be important to Americans generally. And is it not true that our colleagues on the other side of the aisle tend to focus on words a lot? For example, focusing on issues involving transgenderism, issues involving so-called birthing parents, pronouns in their social media. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, it is.
Is that done on purpose? Do you think the gentlelady believes that our colleagues on the other side of the aisle who focus on these names, who focus on these phrases, that they do so on purpose?
Very purposeful.
Right, and that purpose is to advance an agenda. Would you agree?
Yes.
Right, and do you think that the agenda of advancing the Gulf of Mexico naming to Gulf of America is also an agenda by the president and
Yes.
Republicans? Do you believe that that agenda is in line with the people that you represent in pride in the United States of America?
Very clearly so.
Do you think the president shares that pride in the United States of America, and thus that led him to say that maybe we should take the time and the energy to name the Gulf of Mexico, which is surrounded by multiple states in our country, and it's enormous American interests, that would be something that would be important for pride in our country, for the American people?
Yes.
Are there other words that our colleagues on the other side of the aisle tend to use and belabor in terms of trying to advance their agenda, whether it's something like birtherism or, for example, going after historic monuments? And we can have debates about the monuments and so forth, but going after and spending a great deal of time and energy and expense and cost changing monuments, changing mottos at the
Tearing
VA.
them down.
And tearing down statues, is that correct?
Yes.
All at great cost to advance an agenda, is that correct?
Correct.
And here we have the President of the United States wanting to extol the virtues of America.
That's correct.
I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize Mr. Jack for his time of questioning.
Well, I want to echo Mr. Roy's line of questioning. I think that was very effective, talking about why words matter. But just to help me understand, Representative Hageman, I guess the way I see this bill is it really enables us to be efficient and bring into line what the administration has already done. So if you could just help me understand, there's 2 or 3 agencies that have already, is the National Geographic Information Space or something like that. There are already executive branch agencies that have codified Gulf of America into existence on that side. So help me understand, is this bill just bringing us into line with what the executive branch has already done within and throughout its administration?
That's absolutely correct. And it is just following actions that have been taken by other presidents in the past. Very similar.
And could you just, for the committee, describe how this initiative would prioritize American interests and nationalism, as well as promote President Trump's America First agenda?
Well, again, and it goes back to what I was indicating to Mr. Neguse, the Gulf of America is actually very important to the state of Wyoming and our energy producers, and that's why it would be a topic in my state, because they also believe very strongly in America and love America. I just want to give you some quick statistics of why the Gulf of America is so important to our country. The United States has been producing oil offshore in the federal Gulf of America waters since the 1940s, and production from the Gulf has been steadily increasing over the past 30 years. Production today is at nearly 1.8 million barrels per day, and we hope new projects will soon allow us to get over the 2 million mark, which is where we were prior to the pandemic. The Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or BOEM, found that the region contains an estimated technically recoverable resources in the range of 23.31 billion barrels of oil to 36.27 billion barrels of oil. A 2021 report commissioned by the National Ocean Industries Association found that the Gulf of America oil and gas industry supports an estimated 412,000 jobs throughout the country. Offshore oil and gas jobs have an average industry wage of $69,650, which is 29% higher than the national average. I can go on and on and on about describing the importance of the Gulf of America. That's just looking at the energy side of it. If you look at the fisheries side of it, as was brought out by Mr. Scott, it's huge. Also, the recreation industry is so important to the United States. So there are many, many reasons why we would want to clarify and correct what's probably been a historical anomaly in terms of the name of this particular body of water. So I think it makes perfect sense to actually name this the Gulf of America and move on so that we can address some of the other things that are important to our constituents as well.
Well, thank you very much. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentleman yields back. unless somebody's come in that I'm unaware of. That concludes our questions on this. Thank the witnesses for being here today, and we will take a minute to get the next panel up. Thank you.
Yep. I now welcome our second panel, Representative Pfluger and Representative Thompson from the Committee on Homeland Security. Your full statement will be submitted for the record, and we ask you summarize your statement in 5 minutes. Representative Pfluger, I welcome your testimony.
Thank you, Chair Fox, and to the ranking member, we appreciate the opportunity to testify in front of you. To discuss my bill, H.R. 881, the DHS Restrictions on Confucius Institutes and Chinese Entities of Concern Act. This is a bipartisan bill that has been worked on for several Congresses, but has been negotiated within the subcommittee first and then to the full committee. It's no secret that the Chinese Communist Party represents one of the most significant existential threats to the United States and has demonstrated time and again that they are willing to use any tool at their disposal to jeopardize our national security. Originally marketed in 2004 as a mechanism to promote the Chinese language and facilitate cultural exchanges, Confucius Institutes were quickly discovered to be another extension of the CCP global influence apparatus. The CCP has used Confucius Institutes and their offshoots to conduct espionage, surveillance, intellectual property theft, transnational repression, influence academic institutions, and promote military-civil fusion programs. At their peak, the United States hosted approximately 118 institutes, primarily at colleges and universities. There are fewer than 14 active Confucius Institutes today, but the danger remains. And many of these programs have rebranded themselves within universities with the same mission as before, to subvert national security and expand CCP influence operations. H.R. 881 is simple. It prohibits DHS from providing funds to American universities that host a Confucius Institute or maintain relationships with Chinese entities of concern. This legislation will ensure that our students, our intellectual property, and our national security are all protected from the malign influence of the CCP. H.R. 881 passed through the Committee on Homeland Security on voice, and last year this legislation passed 249 to 161 with overwhelming bipartisan support. I'd like to thank Chairman Green for prioritizing this legislation for markup and all of my colleagues who have co-sponsored this bill. Again, Chairman Fox, thank you for the opportunity to testify and to bring 881 up for discussion. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. You're recognized.
Thank you very much. Chairwoman Fox, Ranking Member Scanlon, and members of the Committee on Rules, thank you for the opportunity to speak on H.R. 881, the DHS Restrictions on Confucius Institute and Chinese Entities of Concern Act. Before I begin, I'd like to extend my deepest condolences to Ranking Member McGovern and his family on an unimaginable loss of his daughter, Molly. Molly McGovern was a bright light that was taken from us far too soon. And during this very difficult time, my thoughts and prayers are with the McGovern family and the entire Rules Committee, who are like an extended family. Now, turning to the bill before us today, H.R. 881 requires the Secretary of Homeland Security to ensure that institutions of higher education that have relationships with Confucius Institutes, Thousand Talent programs, or vaguely defined Chinese entities of concern do not receive any funds from the Department of Homeland Security. This type of funding prohibition is on the lines of those found for the Department of Defense in the 2019 and 2021 National Defense Authorization Act and the National Science Foundation in the CHIPS and Science Act of 2022, as it is intended to limit the potential for intellectual property theft, espionage, or curtailment of academic freedom that could happen when certain Chinese educational institutions partner with U.S. institutions of higher education. The Committee on Homeland Security has marked up a version of this bill in the last two Congresses, and last Congress, a different version passed along House largely along party lines. This Congress, the bill's sponsor, Representative Pfluger, has his Democratic counterpart on the Counterterrorism and Intelligence Subcommittee, Representative Magaziner, and our staffs worked together to find compromise language that addresses some of the Democratic concerns with the bill that passed the House last year. First, H.R. 881, as reported, now contains a waiver provision that allows the Secretary to permit DHS funding to go to U.S. institutions of higher education that maintains a relationship with a Confucius Institute Thousand Talent program or a Chinese entity of concern if the relationship is either in the national security interests of the U.S. or has no bearing on the national security interests of the U.S. or allies. Second, the bill now includes a provision that requires the Secretary of Homeland Security to provide outreach and, upon request, technical assistance to U.S. institutions of higher education relating to compliance with the bill. A technical assistance provision should help ensure that a U.S. college or university has the information it needs to know whether its relationship with Chinese colleges or universities may trigger the funding prohibition in the bill. I appreciate Representative Pfluger's willingness to work with us on improving the bill, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I do have a question or two, but I'm going to defer my questioning right now. I do want to give credit where credit's due, and that is to Joe Wilson for having brought this issue up a long, long time ago and raised people's awareness of it. Mr. Griffith, I'll recognize you for any questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is a concern. Mr. Pfluger, is this not part of what China's doing worldwide to try to gain influence, whether it be within our country or other countries as well? Similar things to this. Is this a pattern we're seeing from the Chinese to try to manipulate opinions?
Absolutely. And you look at the Belt and Road Initiative, and this is similar to that. You look at the 2017 intelligence gathering law that the Chinese Communist Party passed. And their soft approach, if you want to call it that, non-kinetic approach, it is part of a larger worldwide scheme to gain influence and really to embed themselves in our universities for many purposes that I think this bill addresses.
And are you saying we just need to make sure we put a stop to this once and for all and forever?
That is absolutely right. This addresses a much-needed vulnerability that we have seen in our universities, which is why you've seen it go from 118 to less than 15.
Yeah, I really appreciate your efforts, and I yield back, Madam Chair.
Ms. Scanlon, you're recognized. Thank you. Mr. Langworthy, you're recognized.
Was investigating this very topic. The first one in the country that was unveiled was in my district at Alfred University. And here was a very small private university who happened to receive DOD grant funding to to do important research in the area of ceramics and materials was hosting this Confucius Center right there, a mere matter of yards from where this research was committed. This is a backdoor opportunity. These organizations should not be welcome on U.S. campuses, and we need to continue to take efforts. So, Mr. Pfluger, thank you for your leadership here, and I yield back my time.
Thank you. Mr. Scott, you're recognized.
I don't have any questions, Madam.
Mr. Norman, you're recognized.
Thank you for putting this up, Congressman Pfluger. Question, we had, one of the schools in South Carolina, the University of South Carolina had a Confucius Institute. My alma mater, Presbyterian, did as well. Is there any safeguards that y'all have in here that stop them from really continuing to have students who change them, they come in under one guise, change the major? Is there any safeguards on that?
When it comes to the waivers that this bill now includes, this is something that the Director of Homeland Security, the Secretary of Homeland Security, looks at with how strong each university is. If you're speaking to, individual students, what I think we have seen is a lot of these students actually are they don't even know that they're being brought into this program. They're being used by whoever's running the Confucius Institute, and they'll change their name. That's why we have this entity of concern. And they'll just use this rotating name-changing game, but they're still there for the malign purposes. So I think I can speak less to the individual student and what they're doing on their major and more to the entities that the Chinese Communist Party is using, whether it be for intellectual property theft or whether it be to place pressure upon a university, such as some that you may represent, to not produce certain reports or certain research or certain things that could make the CCP look bad. And then that's where they get into the game of actually pressuring their own citizens who are studying abroad. I hope that answers your question.
Well, what they're doing with buying land in South Carolina and all over the country is putting it in different LLCs with Americans. In South Carolina, they bought a part that had been made for the military under the guise of an American businessman hiring the people away. It was a CCP. And so it's and I don't know whether universities are aware of that, of what they're doing. Particularly, and you're right, students don't understand it, but when they go back to China, they do. So anyway, if there's any safeguard in that, I think it would get the job done, or it would help verify what they're assumably trying to stop. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Jack, you're recognized.
Thank you very much. And I also want to echo my colleagues' comments on your leadership, Mr. Pfluger, and you being before us today and the issue at hand reminds me, I was hoping you could refresh my memory. In 2020, I believe, the Chinese consulate in Houston had to close down because of tons of threats to not just, as you were saying, some of our intellectual property, some of our energy research. Any thoughts and comments on that?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. This is the way that they like to do business. They take a foothold, say at the consulate, or at a university, and they have this money that's coming in, and this specifically at the universities now, where I'm talking about the entities that we're concerned about, and they use that money as to hold at risk any number of things to further their own interest. And in the case of the consulate, we know that they had been stealing a variety of documents, a variety of sensitive types of information, and then basically holding at risk, holding hostage those that wanted to do the right thing or not succumb to that pressure. So this bill specifically addresses it at universities where we would stop the money flow. Not so much at a consulate, but it's a very similar concept.
That just reminded me of the issue we faced 5 years ago. And the only other comment I'll make, because I know how close you are to and your experience at Nellis Air Force Base, but I understand of the schools that this impacts, some of which are very close to military installations, including Nellis. So any closing thoughts from you on that?
Similar to Mr. Norman's question, that is a concern. The CFIUS process that this does not necessarily address, this bill doesn't go into the CFIUS process, but it is a concern. And these universities that have a proximity, close to a Nellis Air Force Base or close to, quite frankly, any sort of national security, whether it be a DOD or otherwise, is obviously very concerning. And the proximity we have seen all across the United States be very concerning. This specifically stops the money from going to universities, regardless of their proximity. So I want to make that clear, that it doesn't draw a line there. I think we can all sit here and agree and go, yeah, if the University of Nevada at Las Vegas has which I don't think is true, but if they were to have an entity that we're talking about, the proximity to Nellis Air Force Base would be extremely concerning.
Without question. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Jack. Ms. Leisure-Fernandez, you're recognized.
Hello there. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for being here. It's wonderful to see both of you. So I understand your concern about the Chinese having access that they shouldn't, right? That's your big concern, that we want to be careful about that because we agree that the Chinese are not our friends, right? How would you describe the Chinese?
Well,
I mean, not the Chinese Communist Party and the state.
That will require a lot of time to answer that fully, but I'll summarize it by saying that I believe we are in a state of a relationship that has exceeded friends, has exceeded competitors, and has moved into the gray space, the gray zone of trying to undermine, Chinese Communist Party trying to undermine American interest domestically and all across the world.
Right, so the Chinese Communist Party is trying to undermine the United States. So if that is what they are trying to do, we should do whatever we can to not facilitate that, correct?
That's absolutely right.
And so it would seem to me that we would also want to prevent the Chinese from getting control of some of our key resources. Would you agree?
I think that the resource that I'm talking about here specifically today is the resource of education in the university system.
Yeah, but do you think that a key resources could also include
I think that's
rare minerals?
Sure. I think it's a good conversation. I'm sorry that my bill does not cover that aspect. It has more to do with the resource of education.
But do you think that we should try to make sure that the Chinese don't get their hands on rare minerals that might be within the United States?
I think that is a very worthwhile goal in an appropriate committee, yes.
That we would not want them getting a hold of other resources like rare earth, copper, silver, key things that we need to compete in the world, correct?
I don't disagree. Again, to point back to
I would just point
legislation.
out that one of the things that I have tried to raise over and over again is in the Committee of Jurisdiction, that when we do mining laws that allow mining companies to take American resources without paying the American public a dime for those resources, that we should prevent the Chinese from being able to do that. And unfortunately, there are a couple of Republicans who've been willing to sign on to that effort, but we haven't been able to get Republicans to say, listen, we're not going to change the mining laws. We're going to continue to allow people to mine our resources for free, but we should at the very least say no to people like China and Russia and Iran, that their companies, their subsidiaries should not be able to take those resources.
I'm sorry that I did not come prepared to have that conversation with this with the scope of this bill. However, I would love to have that conversation with you.
I will have that conversation with you afterwards, because I think it's the concept of not giving away to our, not a friend, not a competitor, not yet an enemy, but definitely a country of major concern, that we should not be giving away resources like lithium and other things to such a country. And it should be an easy fix that you would think would be bipartisan. With that, I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Leisure-Fernandez. I thank the witnesses for being here today, and seeing no further questions, and you are excused. This closes the hearing portion of our meeting. The chair will be in receipt of a motion from the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott.
Madam Chair, I move the committee grant H.R. 276, the Gulf of America Act, a closed rule. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Natural Resources now printed in the bill shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Natural Resources or their respective designees. The rule provides 1 motion to recommit. The rule further provides for consideration of H.R. 881, the DHS Restrictions on Confucius Institutes and Chinese Entities of Concerns Act, under a closed rule. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that in lieu of the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Homeland Security now printed in the bill, an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 119-2 shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Homeland Security or their respective designees. Finally, the rule provides 1 motion to recommit.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. You've now heard the motion. Any discussion or amendment to the rule? Ms. Leisure-Fernandez.
Madam Chair, I have an amendment to the rule. I move to add the following 2 new sections to the rule, which would allow the House of Representatives to vote to end President Trump's reckless tariffs. First, a new section stating that House Resolution 211 is amended by striking Section 4. This amendment shall take effect as of including in the adoption of House Resolution 211. Second, a new section stating that House Resolution 313 is amended by striking Section 2. This amendment shall take effect as of including in the adoption of the House Resolution 313. As we have been going about holding our town halls and having discussions with people across our district, Americans are very upset with the tariffs, and why not? Those tariffs have caused price increases. They are causing
Madam Chairman,
shortages, supply chain.
Point of order.
Yes, sir.
How is this germane to the bill that
Well,
we're voting on?
I've just gotten the amendment in front of
Tariffs
me.
have nothing to do with what we're considering today. It's not germane. I mean, it's out of order.
Well, give us just a second.
Madam, I would note that if they don't want to vote on it, they can vote down the amendment. But the chair correctly ruled on this question last week, so I'll simply add that this week's rule should cover this matter as well as something as disparate as the Gulf of Mexico and Chinese spying. And then we have the second thing.
The gentleman makes a point of order that the amendment is not germane. The amendment is not germane, so the point of order is sustained.
Madam Chair, I appeal I appeal the ruling of the chair and request a recorded vote.
The gentlewoman appeals the ruling of the chair, and we'll
Madam Chair, I make a motion to table the appeal.
the gentlewoman makes a motion to table the appeal. We will vote on the motion from the gentlewoman on tabling the appeal of the ruling of the chair. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach?
Yes.
Mrs. Fishbach, yes. Mr. Norman? Mr. Norman, yes. Mr. Roy?
Yes.
Mr. Roy, yes. Mrs. Houchin? Mrs. Houchin, yes. Mr. Langworthy? Mr. Langworthy, yes. Mr. Scott? Mr. Scott, yes. Mr. Griffith?
Yes.
Mr. Griffith, yes. Mr. Jack?
Yes.
Mr. Jack, yes. Mr. McGovern? Ms. Scanlon? No. Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Neguse? Ms. Ledger Fernandez?
Yes. No, sorry.
Ms. Ledger Fernandez, no. Madam Chair?
Yes.
Madam Chair, yes.
The clerk will report the tally.
9 yeas, 2 nays.
The motion to table the appeal of the chair, the ruling of the chair relative to the germaneness of the amendment is the upheld. Is there any further discussion on the amendment, on the rule?
Madam Chair.
Yes,
Madam
ma'am.
Chair, I have an amendment to the rules. Since the committee is unwilling to even vote on whether they should vote on having tariffs, I move the committee to additionally provide as an amendment to the rule for consideration of a resolution to be introduced by myself, debatable for 1 hour, equally divided between the chair and the ranking member of the Committee on Rules. The text of the resolution is as followed. Resolved that House Resolution 211 is amended by striking Section 4. This amendment shall take effect as of including the adoption of House Resolution 211. Section 2, House Resolution 313 is amended by striking Section 2. This amendment shall take effect as including the adoption of House Resolution 313. You are clearly determined to avoid a vote on the tariffs, even though it is our constitutional duty to require that, and these tariffs are tanking our economy, and the public wants us to take action. Prices are about to skyrocket. I believe that my previous amendment was germane, but under your logic, it fell outside the scope of the rule because it did not provide for consideration of a measure like the other sections of the rule did. I've solved that problem and look forward to having a vote on this motion. And once again, if you don't agree with the motion, you can vote against it.
Madam Chair, do you have the language for HR 211?
Yes. HR,
No, we'd like to
It's
have the
publicly
language
available.
of the amendment.
yeah, it's publicly available, and that is the section that said,
A new section stating that House Resolution 211 is amended. HR 211 is equal access to contraception for veterans.
the rule.
Oh.
The rule.
Res,
the rule,
okay.
The rule for HR 211. And that might be the one where you actually stop the clock. And so that Congress has said time does not move with regards to voting on the resolution on the tariffs. I'm just suggesting that we are not in a time machine, but that we should indeed allow the clock to actually continue in its march through time, and that we should be allowed to vote on the resolution with regards to the tariffs.
You've heard the amendment by the gentlelady from New Mexico. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed
A
to.
recorded vote, Madam Chair.
The gentlewoman has asked for a recorded vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach?
No.
Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? No. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin? No. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern? Ms. Scanlon? Aye. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Ms. Ledger Fernandez?
Aye.
Ms. Ledger Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
The clerk will report the tally.
2 yeas, 9 nays.
The amendment is not, the noes have it, the amendment is not agreed to. Is there further discussion or amendment to the rule? Hearing none, hearing no further discussion, the question is on the motion from the gentleman from Georgia. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion's agreed to. Ms. Scanlon requests a recorded vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach?
Yes.
Mrs. Fishbach, yes. Mr. Norman? Yes. Mr. Norman, yes. Mr. Roy? Aye. Mr. Roy, yes. Mrs. Houchin? Aye. Mrs. Houchin, yes. Mr. Langworthy? Aye. Mr. Langworthy, yes. Mr. Scott? Yes. Mr. Scott, yes. Mr. Griffith? Yes. Mr. Griffith, yes. Mr. Jack?
Yes.
Mr. Jack, yes. Mr. McGovern? Ms. Scanlon? No. Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Goose? Ms. Ledger-Fernandez?
No.
Ms. Ledger-Fernandez, no. Madam Chair?
Aye.
Madam Chair, yes.
The clerk will report the tally.
9 yeas, 2 nays.
The ayes have it. The motion to report is agreed to. Accordingly, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott, will be managing this rule for the majority. And Ms. Scanlon will manage the rule for the minority.
Madam Chair, I missed the very beginning of the meeting, and I just wanted to express my continued prayers and thoughts for Mr. McGovern, noting his absence and why he's absent, and the loss of Molly, and continue to keep him in our prayers.
Thank you, Mr. Roy. And I think Mr. Roy speaks for all of us on our side of the aisle, and we will continue to pray for the McGovern family. Without objection, the committee is adjourned.